Yo, hello. Welcome to a Geometry Dash video where I'll talk about making the background scale with the camera when it uses the zoom trigger. Or the idea is basically when the camera zooms out, the background kind of follows it by scaling itself up and of course scales back down when the camera zooms in. I'm not really sure if this can be done using other triggers, but I wanted to do this using the scale, follow, and advanced follow triggers, since I believe that is everything that I need, but I'm not really sure if I'm correct, so I tried to learn it. I need a center. See center, right? Why is it down there? Oh, the guide. It says the same thing. So what I know so far is that the C in the advanced follow thinks that the center of the screen is at the bottom left corner. So I thought, what if instead of making that move to the actual center of the screen, I just move the entire screen itself? And in order to do that, we need the kind of coordinates of the supposed center from the actual center, which is 110 or negative 110.5 in the x-axis and negative 67.5 in the y, if the size of the screen is 1 or that it is zoomed to 1. But I think this doesn't work with different aspect ratios since it is based on the bottom left, which would be different for all kinds of screens. But that's a problem for later. So the idea is that the group 105 is the quote-unquote center of the screen on the advanced follow trigger, and then we group the background into a follow trigger, which is set to follow the group 105. And now all we need to do is to offset the screen to the top right of 105 and we're good to go. If you don't know the know-how of the triggers used here, you can always check the editor guide. So now, I tried to put it along the layout, but I think it's wrong to test it in the middle where I would need to reset the camera in the start position. So I moved it to the start of the level. I also noticed that the Y offset of the supposed center is not right, so I changed my nose to the member. And as you can see, the center, well, let's think of the name center as a placeholder, is at the bottom left of the screen, and that the location of the background is indicated by the white objects. All preparations done, I now tried to make tests on the scaling. Now, since the screen zooms out, the objects would seem small, so as it zooms out, the background would need to increase in size. However, in the zoom trigger, the smaller the value means the bigger the screen, which is not the case in the scale trigger. So I thought of this formula. It shows that the previous value of the background scale, or before as in B, should be divided by how much the screen zoomed in or out before the current zoom trigger, with a time duration of the current zoom trigger in order to bring the scale of the background to 1, to get a value that the first scale trigger would use. And then dividing that with the occurrence, or the value that the current zoom trigger uses, in order to get A or after, which is the amount that the second scale trigger would need to use. The reason why there's two scale triggers is for one to return the scaling of the background to, well, 1, and another to adjust it to the current zooming of the screen. I then noticed that the background does not zoom in or out centered, but that's because the triggers only take in 3 decimal places. My values, when used in the formula, uses more than that. So I had to be creative with the numbers so that the inputs and outputs do not exceed the number of decimal places that the triggers allow. I found that 0.8, 1.25, and 1.6 are fine as inputs since by dividing 1 by them, the result only has 3 decimals. As you can see, the background fits the screen, but is delayed in scaling. Might be the gains problem, I don't know, but it does work. To explain everything better, I compiled everything in one list. First, it says that the formula uses the value of B, or the scale of the background before the current zoom trigger, and then divides it by the value of the previous zoom trigger. Note that the values for the scale is for the background design, and that the values of the zoom is for the screen, and that these two are inversely proportional, or that when one increases, the other decreases. Now, by dividing the value of the scale by the value of the zoom, both before the current zoom trigger, we bring the scale of the background and the screen to its natural value of 1. And by dividing this again by the currents, or the value of the current zoom trigger, which dare I say needs to only have 3 decimals, we then get the value of A or after as the value we will use for the second scale trigger. That's why we need 2 scale triggers. And after this, we then let A become B, or that for the next zoom trigger, the value for B that it will use will be the value of A from the previous zoom trigger. We can then repeat this as many times as you want, regardless of any static trigger that might interfere with where the screen would be. To be honest, I don't know if this will work with different aspect ratios since the point of reference of the center of the screen is actually the bottom left, or that different aspect ratios would have different distances from its bottom left to the center. But I guess it could be fixed by asking users at the start of the level which aspect ratio are they using and just adjust the screen's distance from the point of reference based on their choice. But nevertheless, the zooming is a bit delayed, but I think that's bearable, and more importantly, it works. Also, tell me if this can be done using other triggers, but nevertheless, hope you liked and understood it, and I'll see you guys next time.